my video, to my radio.
Hello, Pixels. I'm the founder of PixelFest, Jeremy, and welcome back to another PixelCast. As you may or may not know, if you've been following along, then you know this is the third PixelCast. Started this just a couple of weeks ago. I dove right in head first. Really no idea what I was doing. I had wanted to do a podcast. I'd wanted to do one for a long time. And it was one of those things that I just kept putting off. And so I did one. I threw something together. I just ranted for 36 minutes. And it turned out to be okay. And people have been watching that first PixelCast and the second one from last week. So I've also found that it's something that I'm looking forward to on Wednesdays. And so I want to continue to grow the community. As you may know, PixelFest is a local event dedicated to gaming and playing games. Of course, we all like games, with a sort of veiled intent to get people into making them, learning how to write code, how to create 3D models, how to basically collaborate in a team environment to create great things. And that's what we're trying to do. Our tagline is growing through love of games. And again, this is the third week, so welcome back. And I just want to do a little bit of PixelFest reflection at the beginning of each episode. As I mentioned in the first episode, a lot of people have been asking about PixelFest in 2019. When is it? And of course, I had to tell people there will not be a PixelFest in 2019. Unfortunately, we're moving to 2020, putting a year and a half between events, which is, it gives them a little bit of a different feel. And it's sort of like the Olympics, how every 2 years you've got the summer, then the winter, and they feel a little different. So we're moving back to the springtime for PixelFest in 2020, and I mentioned before that I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I hadn't laid much groundwork. Since that time, I have had the first preliminary meeting where I met with someone that I'm hoping to partner with in order to pull off what I am calling, I would drop the name right now. I'm going to be calling it PixelFest Open Source. And I'm extremely, extremely excited about this because I think this will be the format of PixelFest that can really extend into the future. If you know anything about PixelFest history, I founded the festival in 2015. The first ever PixelFest was in April of 2016. We did a 2017 event in April a year later. And then we took a year and a half off between 2017 and 2018 and did one in October of 2018. So the first two PixelFests were at Slover Library in downtown Norfolk, and the third was at Half Moon Cruise and Celebration Center in downtown Norfolk. All of those were exceptional venues with wonderful staffs that helped us to, I think, really create a nice environment for playing, for learning, and for collaborating with people. So I'm very, very excited to be have started the planning process for the fourth PixelFest, which will be in 2020, and having that initial meeting, I'm very excited about the prospects of the new format and what it's going to mean, I think, for every year going to the future, because I think this will finally be the format, where it can just grow indefinitely. In other news, of course, we had another PixelFest Devs meetup last night. It was out in Virginia Beach at Dave & Buster's. It was cool. It was 6 of us that got together. So these PixelFest dev meetups, they tend to be pretty intimate. You can really have deep discussions with people about either the art, the programming, the history of their game development. People bring their current projects in and show them off to get feedback. There is, certainly cross-pollination, teamwork, and team building that happens there. For example, one of the projects that somebody had, I will be helping out doing some programming work on that project, and that all came because of PixelFest Devs. It's something that if you're listening to this and you haven't been to a Devs meetup yet, I highly recommend that you come on out, because you never know who you're going to meet. You never know what kind of work you're going to pick up. You never know what kind of feedback you're going to get on a project that you're working on. And so it was a very nice time, and it was cool meeting out in Dave & Buster's. We haven't been out there since shortly after the first Pixel Fest. We did an event out there, like an E3 party, and that was a lot of fun. We had one of the program rooms at Dave & Buster's, but this was the first time I think we've been back there in a number of years, and it was a great time. Um, we sort of, I don't want to say we partied, we didn't party too hard, but we hung out pretty late into the evening, lots of good discussion, and I think some game projects are going to come out of that, so that's very, very cool. And let's see here. So with that, I am going to now move into the industry news. And as I said in the first episode of the PixelCast, I had no formatting, just ranting for 36 minutes. Last week, I added a little bit of light formatting, and my wife saw it. She caught a piece of that, and she was like, well, the background is way too busy there. I had the whole Gama Sutra website, like, over on this side, and then over on this side, there was like the background from one of the PixelFest events with lots of people, and it was kind of crazy. The background this week, of course, this is from the Art of Video Games at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. This is a quote from Nolan Bushnell. Video games foster the mindset that allows creativity to grow. I think it's a great quote, and I always love this shot. It's just very cool, and they've got the Advances in Mechanics, which is one of the exhibits that was at the Art of Video Games. So I'm enjoying this background. Let me know if you like it. Okay, first up in the news, there was a cool video on Gama Sutra with a fellow Chris Tang, who was an esports champion way back in the day, like in the NES and Super NES days. He got into the game industry because he was an esports champion and became a developer, started designing games, and I think, in fact, trying to think if this was the right talk, I think he's now doing the coding work, like where he's writing all the code on a game that he's working on. It seems like he's done almost everything in the game industry from the talk. And this talk is about using Tetris as an esport, and it's one of the more interesting talks that I've seen coming out of the GDC Vault lately. So this is another one from GDC 2019. Really interesting if you're interested in esports, Tetris, or just hearing from somebody who has a long career in the game industry and all the things that he's done. This is a great video to watch. Discord. Everybody's using Discord lately, right? I mean, players can contact developers through Discord. I know I recently had an experience. We were working on a project using Live to do some mixed reality capture of VR. We were doing Beat Saber, and one of the projects internally, it's one that I'm consulting on, but we wanted to capture footage of a player inside this simulation, which is on top of an aircraft carrier. So we're using Live, and we couldn't get it to work, so we were able to get in touch with the developer of Live through Discord, which was very cool. This particular headline, of course, has more to do with the subscription service, the game service that Discord added about a year ago. And so apparently they were paying developers to give certain games away for free for players who subscribe to Discord, and that hasn't been working out for them. Players have simply not been playing those games. So they sign up for a subscription, they get these games for free, they don't play them. So apparently this is something the players really don't value, and I guess Discord will see if this has an effect on their bottom line, like maybe it's enticing players to subscribe, whether they play the games or not. To tell you the truth, though, when I read this headline, I thought, this makes sense. They're giving these things away. They're paying. Players don't value the things that they're being given, and they're not playing them. So, why continue to do that? E3. So, obviously, if you're in Hampton Roads and you're watching this, or even in the Mid-Atlantic, growing up, there was E3, there was CES, there was GDC, and a ton of other events that weren't happening here. Me personally, a big inspiration, or a big, let's say maybe more of a motivator for doing a festival here in Hampton Roads was the fact that I grew up not really being able to go to many of those events because they were so far away. And this headline, though, it caught my attention, though, because E3, it looks like what they're going to do is try to pivot into being a fan, media, and influencer festival. Of course, traditionally, E3 has been a big dog and pony show for the large game publishers. For years and years and years, we have sat there and we have waited for Microsoft to get up and do their Xbox presentation, for Nintendo to do theirs, for Sony to do theirs, the big three press conferences, and then of course there were umpteen other game publishers doing big press conferences at this event as well. And in recent years, we have noticed that these really large game powerhouses have reduced their footprint at E3, and they've started doing like direct to consumer videos to pitch their new content. I think Nintendo kicked this off with the Nintendo Direct, and so that trend has continued, and it looks like E3 feels that it's going to have to pivot soon and sort of change up the format of what that event is. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this. I mean, it does make sense in light of what's been happening. And let's see, what's next? Kojima details the subtly social gameplay of Death Stranding. Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding is, at his own admission, a tough game to explain. Now, that doesn't really give us much information on the game or what Kojima is saying about the game, but I have to admit, I'm confused by this game every time that I see the Boondock Saints guy and I think about him in a Metal Gear game. Because every time I see Kojima and a picture of this guy, that's all I can think about, so I'm completely confused as well. Okay. So the previous headlines were all from Gamasutra. As I mentioned in previous episodes of the PixelCast, I get a lot of my news from Gamasutra, but I also get a ton of news from VentureBeat, which is it's more aimed at startups and at the business side even than Gamasutra is. Whereas Gamasutra is sort of, they say the art and business of video games is what they cover, and I think that's about true because the art, it plays a large role on the Gamasutra site, and then the business seems a little bit secondary. When I was actually younger, it used to be the art and science of video games is what Gamasutra covered, and so it was very much into the art and the programming and engineering. And they do a lot less engineering now, a lot more business, which probably gets more people reading it. And at any rate, VentureBeat, it takes it a step further, I think, on the business side, and there are a lot of game headlines on VentureBeat as well. It's just, like I said, more to do with basically the money, the startup side of things, the business side of things. So this first headline from VentureBeat is GameSeer Venture Partners is going to invest $11.1 million in game projects. So the founders of this fund, they have extensive experience. I think they've shipped like 80 million copies of the games that they've worked on, and they're looking now to invest in game projects anywhere from $150,000, I think, on up to $1.5 million, depending on the project. This is something that if you're sitting on a game that you're looking for help with, you might check it out. And it's something that if you're just getting rolling, to realize that this is out there. There's real money out there for video game projects. Video games are startups. That's why this is on VentureBeat. And here in Hampton Roads, what we need to be looking at is how to a big part of the startup culture here, and we're lucky that we have one. But it's economic development. It's creating great companies that are here that can serve the world. And so when you have a model like that, what you're doing is you've got the people and the team and the headquarters right here in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and you are serving billions of people around the world and bringing revenue back into your home city. So obviously other places are doing this. They're doing a great job of this, and in Hampton Roads, something that we need to be doing a better job of. And but who knows? A fund like this could be interesting for you. FieldWire raises $33.5 million to digitize construction sites. So this is, obviously aside from gaming directly, but augmented reality, apps, all of these technologies, they're converging, they're overlapping. So if you can build a game, then who knows? Maybe you'll build some sort of AR experience or some sort of database that has plenty of use outside of the game industry. Or maybe you've just worked on your skill set as a game developer, and now you're looking for a career that might have more job safety, and maybe you're just looking to affect the real world a little bit more. FieldWire, it looks like they're getting out into construction sites, and I could see this being hooked with augmented reality, HoloLens. Trimble is a big player in sort of the construction space and augmented reality. They've got the construction hat that actually hooks up with the HoloLens, and I believe they recently acquired SketchUp, formerly Google SketchUp, and formerly before that I think was just a startup. I remember SketchUp right when it got rolling, but this field is very hot, and this is a place where you might look to participate in this if you made a couple of games and maybe you're looking to get into some more utilitarian industry. I know that's something that like in 2012, after I had made a string of games, and I realized that how risky that was, and what I decided to do was diversify. But now I still make games, still love games, but diversifying into utilitarian tools is a good thing to do, and clearly there's a lot of money in that market. So GitLab raises $268 million at a $2.7 billion valuation. So, of course, last year, Microsoft acquired GitHub, and I think that was to the dismay of many a developer. Plenty of people just don't like Microsoft on principle and will flock away from anything that they have. So I certainly remember seeing headlines saying that GitLab's growth was exploding last year because of the acquisition of GitHub by Microsoft. And of course, I've also talked to other developers say they just like GitHub better. So there's, obviously there's opinions either way. But no doubt, look at this thing, $2.7 billion valuation. It has skyrocketed. Obviously, people love using Git, and they love using a hosted service that's going to watch out for their data for them, make sure it's accessible all the time and everything like that. So I think both GitHub and GitLab are multi-billion-dollar startups at this point, and this is interesting, something to keep an eye on. How this competes going forward with GitHub. And I think this is the last headline of the day. Riot Games says 10-year-old League of Legends has hit 8 million concurrent players daily. So this is a big number, and it's a big number for a lot of reasons. Of course, these MOBAs, these games have taken off over the past, I guess it's been 10 years. I played League with some friends and family a while back, and I had fun with the game. It wasn't exactly my cup of tea because I just felt that it was a bit time consuming for me at that particular point in my life. Sitting down for 45 minutes or for an hour for a match is what I remember. Took some time, and I can't, and the truth is I can't remember if it was League or if it was Dota that I was playing. I'm pretty sure it was League. Anyway, the great thing about this story is that this game's been going for 10 years and it's at 8 million concurrent players daily, which means this game has fantastic retention. So as a developer, you want to develop a game that's obviously fun and it's something that catches people's eye right off the bat and they're going to get into. Lots of people are going to get into it. But another term, and this is a term that I learned, or I'm sure that I'd heard it before, but the first time that it was really sort of like hitting home and being very personal for me, I had made Crash for Cash. It was being played 100,000 times a day, and I had gone to a conference at MIT called MITBIG. It was the MIT Business and Gaming Conference. It was a pretty cool conference. I saw Kurt Schilling speak there. I saw I'm going to get his name wrong, but the fellow who basically produced BioShock, I saw him speak there. So this was a pretty cool conference to attend, and I got to go to an investor panel, like the first investor that I ever spoke to, I think, and I told him, I've got this game, and it's super popular, and, what am I going to do about this? What can I do? And he basically said, hey, that's great that you've made a game that's popular right now, but does it have retention? That is the thing that is most important when you develop something. And what that means is basically that you've made something, you've gotten it popular, and not only were you able to get through the technical portion of making a product, not only were you able to attract people's eyeballs with that, but you were able to make it last for a long time and have something that people would just return to and return to and return to. So this is huge news for League of Legends. Obviously this was already an incredibly valuable IP, but definitely something to think about. When you're making your game, is this going to be something people care about in 10 years, like League? One more headline here. Let's see. Okay. Yes, this is the last headline. All right. So OpenAI teaches AI teamwork by playing hide and seek. In case you're unfamiliar with OpenAI, this is a thing that some of the most famous sort of startup people in the world, Elon Musk, although he started out making games, and Sam Altman of Y Combinator are working on this. And AI is something that people are, I think, incredibly excited about, but also incredibly concerned about, right? Like, where is this going now that our machines can think and problem solve more efficiently than we can? Obviously, people's minds go right to Terminator, and hopefully that's not the future. Hopefully the future is something maybe a little bit more like the Jetsons. Who knows? We'll see. But this is interesting in machine learning and artificial intelligence work. In this article, I dug a little bit deeper. It seems that by pairing the AI in teams, they were able to actually make it work more efficiently, which was pretty cool. Here you can see it's hide and seek. So this is something definitely to keep your eye on. See what OpenAI is working on, and how is this going to be guided? If it's AI is something you're interested in, something certainly to check out. Obviously, it has huge implications in game development. One of the things that I am most fascinated by is the thought of using AI and machine learning to create truly dynamic NPC dialogue. So we've all played those games where we go and we speak to the NPC, and the conversation bridges this way a little bit and then that way a little bit, but eventually you get to that point where the conversation just won't progress, and you just like the illusion is just shattered. The NPC is just caught in a cycle. What if we could have truly dynamic dialogues with NPCs? And it seems like AI could lead to something like that. I think there are a couple of other people working on that idea. I had the idea a while back, and then I caught a headline after I'd been thinking about it for a while, and I was like, what? I hope that goes somewhere, and someone comes up with an SDK, API, whatever the case may be, where it could create some really cool dynamic NPCs using AI. All right. So, as you can see already, the show is getting a little bit more formatted here. I don't want the formatting to weigh it down and take away from, just being loose and easygoing and very real. But I think a little bit of guideline for the show helps. So, this is what's Jeremy working on. So obviously I'm doing this podcast, and that's something I'm working on, and planning PixelFest, of course. But inside of Midnight Status, I'm also doing a few other internal projects in addition to doing some consulting. So I'm consulting on someone's game project. I'm doing some consulting with HoloLens in sort of in the military space, and then internally, on top of PixelFest, I have Swapfire and I have Stream SDK. Stream SDK is something that I've been working on since 2012, and I am very close to releasing version 3.0 of Stream SDK. So it started life as just a video chat sort of asset for Unity. I created it because I did start Peninsula in 2012. I won at that event, thankfully. That was awesome. It was a wonderful experience, and that's what sort of really got me into startups. Over the years, I kept working on it, though, because I initially released it for $50, and it became, money that was coming in every month. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was like, well, I might as well keep that on the market. If people report bugs to me, fix that, do this, do that. And, trying to find a place for it. It really wasn't until last year. I had rewritten the rendering completely. I was doing high-definition video. I was doing game streaming. The technology had really come a long way from where it started. And I ended up raising the price as sort of an experiment, because it started at $50. At one point, I slowly raised it 75, 100, 125. At one point, I tried to raise it to 250. Couldn't sell any copies at that price, so I pulled it back to 125. I had it there for a long time. And then after redoing the rendering, I renamed it. So I changed the name from Video Chat to Stream SDK. And I said, the rendering now is really sweet. I'm going to call this thing Stream SDK, and I'm going to try $250 again. So I put this asset out at $250, and people were buying it. And I was selling more copies than I had previously. One big difference, though, it was that everybody that purchased the asset emailed me first to ask me about it. I guess make sure I'm a real person, that I'm responsive, that I'm going to support it. And I also noticed, though, that a lot of these folks were from, larger organizations. I think, in general, streaming is still pretty esoteric. I think there are not that many people that really understand it or, have a desire to use it. It doesn't seem, maybe the value proposition is not completely straightforward to everybody, or, just, people, it's just something that's going to take time to get out there. But when I noticed that, I said, this is interesting. I think I'm going to raise the price to $2,500 and see what happens, because like I said, it was people from larger companies, and it was people that were more advanced that were messaging me, and I just decided to give it a try. And when I did that, the sales of Stream SDK actually went up the next month, which was just mind blowing, right? And and also the quality of the customers that were getting were higher. I moved away from people. I think a lot of, and this is going to sound wrong, but sometimes when you get an indie developer and they're just learning, they might want to jump into something, but they require a lot of hand-holding. So early on, the first 6.5 years that I was doing this, I answered a tremendous number of support questions, and, while I was selling this product and trying to educate people and do all this stuff. And now all of a sudden I changed the price. and there were high-level engineers at Microsoft, at Charter Communications, and other companies started becoming my customers. They asked fewer questions. They understood exactly what to do with it, and it was kind of a magical moment for Stream SDK. Now, one thing I did realize though, as I was doing this, I'm trying to push it. I'm like, okay, people are buying this, and I'm selling a decent number of copies of this thing, but not that many people not that many people understood what it was. And so what I had to do was I had to make a really hard decision, right? Do I leave this money that's coming in behind in order to really grow what it is the product's trying to accomplish? This was a very difficult decision. It's not one that I could take lightly, and to be frank, I think it could blow up in my face. I think that who knows if this is going to work, but I've converted it over from being a paid thing to where this product will be a free to start on PC, Mac, Linux, kind of like Unity is, or Unity was. I think Unity is almost free to use on everything now to begin with. And there are two paths. So one is if you want to unlock additional platforms, then there'll be a subscription fee associated with that. And then another path is if you have a certain number of connections, within a rolling 30-day period. So if you're getting a lot of usage out of this, then there will also be a subscription fee for that. So this is, I think, the first really subscription system that I've built, and it seems to make sense though. Systems like Photon, which is a networking library in Unity, use a very similar system. Unity itself is subscription based these days, and so this is something I've been working on for quite a while actually, and I'm nearing the release. I'm not quite there yet, but this Stream SDK is doing full game streaming with in-game audio. So think Google Stadia. You could create your own app that's doing that. You can create your own Skype, and you can stream any kind of content from any device without any special hardware. So you could have a game running on an Android. You could be controlling it from a PC and having the audio and video from the Android stream back to the PC. And you could do it with a Magic Leap and a HoloLens or whatever. It's completely cross-platform, just like Unity. And I'm excited. First and foremost, I think I'm excited about getting it out there in a form factor that many more people can engage with it. So, it's not ready quite yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the future for Stream SDK, and we'll see if it works out. It could be huge. If it doesn't work out, well, on to the next one, I guess. All right, and also there's this guy. So obviously, I've been working on SwapFire. Without SwapFire, there would be no PixelFest. The reason for the festival was because this was a couch multiplayer Wii U game. We planned on taking it to many shows that were up and down the East Coast at least, if not some other shows that might have been further away, so we can have people in person sitting down on the couch, playing Wii U in 5-player mode, having a great time. Since there was nothing local, we decided to do PixelFest so that we could show off SwapFire. That was like although I think there were many reasons why PixelFest got rolling, and I mean, the longer I do this, the more I realize how many moments in my life led up to it. But SwapFire was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And that was the impetus. So in 2016, after the first PixelFest, SwapFire was released on the Wii U. In 2017, we did a successful Kickstarter for SwapFire 2 for the Switch, and one of the prizes in that Kickstarter was a comic book. So Vince White, who I have been working with for 6 or 7 years, is a local comic book artist. He created the Will Power series and the Powerverse, and we've been having great collaboration for so many years, and I actually found him on Kickstarter. He was one of the few sort of artists that were running successful Kickstarters in the area back in 2012. Anyway, Vince had sent me this cover, the one that you see it's a little more colorful, the one that's purple on the left side there. He sent me this cover, and I was blown away. I was like, this is absolutely perfect. I love it, and at some point, though, he decided that he was going to be too slow to be doing the color for the whole comic, and so we brought on a guy, Rush Cassidy, to do the colors. And so he did the whole rest of the comic book, and then at some point, I guess he did the cover as well. And Vince then, what he uploads for the final print, and we're not quite there yet, but what he put up was the cover on the right, and I said, Vince, what's going on here? This cover looks completely different, and the other cover was perfect. Why are we changing it? Now he and the funny thing is he didn't say a whole lot. He was like, oh, we can use the other one if you want, whatever. And I was really trying to dive in to see what was the reason for this change, right? Now, I can say first and foremost, the cover on the right does match the art style, or at least the color of the rest of the book better, because then it's all done by the same artist. But then again, it's a cover, and we've all heard the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover," but everybody does it, right? So a cover, it's really separate from the rest of the book, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to match perfectly. It has to be whatever is going to grab your eyes. That's my take on it. Now, I could not make my mind up about this, so I put the two covers up on the PixelFest. You may have seen this already on Facebook, on Twitter, on Swapfire. I asked various people what they thought. I'd say almost everybody's got a different opinion. But the one very interesting thing was that on the Swapfire page, which is basically dedicated Nintendo fans, almost at a 10-to-1 rate, people picked the cover on the left, the more colorful cover, as the one that they would like. And although PixelFest, obviously, if you're watching this and you're part of PixelFest, you probably like to game. You might be thinking about making games. You might be very technical. Most people through the PixelFest community chose the cover on the right, which I found to be very interesting. I wasn't sure if it had to do with maybe like the military presence here in Hampton Roads, being a little bit darker and grittier. Somebody else, it was actually Lex Rook, who's working on the world building for this comic book and also helping with the game, basically said that, there's Nintendo fans and then there's everybody else, right? And Nintendo fans tend to like things that are more colorful, that are more cartoony, all of that, just sort of, and I don't want to say more imaginative, because I don't think that's not quite right, but, you can imagine Nintendo fans liking something that's very colorful, like what you see on the left there. Now, when I look at these two, I am so conflicted, though, because sometimes I look at the one on the right, and I think that it might actually be technically better executed, but no matter what, when I give them that first glance, the cover on the left just grabs my eye more. And so I think that's the direction that I'm heading in with this. There are some effects that you see here on the right that are not present on the left cover yet. The text, obviously, at the bottom needs to be changed. There's some obvious things that need to go into the cover on the left to bring it up to the complete level of the cover on the right. But I think basically those things are going to happen, and it's probably going to be the cover that's on the left there, because our Nintendo fans on the Swapfire page, so far, that seems to be what they like. And I think personally, I'm leaning in that direction, although I appreciate both of these. I'm amazed at the work that Vince and Russ have done on this. And it's been a long process to create this comic book. I think we've been working on it for over 6 months, and I'm hoping to one day be cranking one of these out per month, and we'll see if we can get there. So, what's next? Developer lesson. So this week I met with a developer who has attended every PixelFest from North Carolina, Jeremy English. And if you're out there listening, Jeremy, it was great meeting with you. The other day, and wishing you luck on the games that you're working on. But it came up that Jeremy's working with a lot of different teams, and whenever he partners with somebody, he's just tossing out hey, 50-50, or whatever it is, throwing out some sort of hard concrete value, and I guess it's easy to put that out there. Some people obviously will get way into the weeds and start slicing and dicing, and it's this and it's that, and we have to have a contract first and NDAs, and they'll put all this stuff together. And I think that there's a system sort of in the middle of the easy, I can't make up my mind, so we're just going to split everything, and we're going to get down with a scalpel, and if you tie your shoelaces, then you're out of the project and you lose all your equity in it, that type of thing. And I think what I recommend, and I think it's been working pretty well, is just the dynamic split. Now, some people may be familiar with doing a dynamic split. There's a book that's been going around called Slicing Pie for the last 7 years or so, and it's got this whole model broken down. But basically what you do is you just assign an hourly rate to somebody that you want to work with. In the book, the recommendation is whatever your last hourly rate at a job was when you're doing a startup, and a game is a startup, you just double that rate, and then what you do is you just log your hours at that rate, say what you did or whatever. Somebody on the team's a manager and sort of has oversight on what everybody's doing, making sure that it's, it's valuable and whatnot. And if it's not, then they redirect or maybe, remove a team member. But even if a team member is removed, whatever they contributed up to that point is, they've still got, in the book it's called Pi, but basically they still have something like equity in the project. And so it doesn't really matter if somebody works for like a half an hour on the project or whether they work 1,000 hours on a project. There's some contribution that they made, and so you can do that with a dynamic split. With Midnight Status, I actually, years ago when I started taking on consulting work, I created a very simple form and database that's it's more or less like a simple hour logger, but it's basically got a field for consultant email. It's got a form for the hours worked, the project that they're worked on, and whatever the contribution was. And so using that tool, and Slicing Pi has their own tool called the Pi Slicer. I think you can go to the pislicer.com. That's something you can pay for if you want. It's like $20 a month if you want to use that, I think. But if you know anything about setting up a simple website with a form with a database in the back, you can make this yourself, and it just allows a little bit more flexibility, because if you dive into something 50-50, obviously what the expectation is that you're both going to do equal amounts of work. And if one person feels like they're working harder than somebody else, then what happens is that leads to let's say feelings that aren't so good. It's a resentment will build up. But when you're doing a dynamic split, that resentment will never build up, because that at any given time somebody might have 50% and somebody might have less or more or whatever. But the split is dynamic. It's based on actual contributions. Those contributions are monitored, and so it's not as high pressure as like getting in and trying to define this contract and what you're going to do and what you're going to promise and all that stuff. So it's I think it's a nice, healthy balance between just like, let's get in and do this work and split everything, and I'm going to assume that we're going to both work the same. And obviously the super high pressure, we need NDAs and contributor agreements and all this legal stuff before we work, and everything is outlined. And if you miss on any one of these things, you're totally out. You're totally just not having a good time. So I think keep an eye on the dynamic split. If you're a developer and you're looking to team up with somebody, read Slicing Pi. I think that is a book that I recommend to so many people, and so many people don't understand this. Even though this book I feel like now is old, I am constantly consulting with people and having to say, hey, you need to read this book, because you're trying to make a startup, you're trying to bring partners into it, and you're either fighting too much and slowing down because you can't get your contracts just perfect, or you're rushing in too quick and you're creating a setup that's not sustainable and is going to end up causing resentment. So okay, now why am I excited? Okay, of course I am continually excited by game development and by games in general. Obviously that's what got me into it. If it wasn't for cool video games, I never wanted to make them. Now that I like to make them, I'm constantly enthralled by learning new techniques, meeting people, just the whole shebang. But specifically this week, I am excited about something, and like I said, I've been telling a couple of people this. I stayed up way too late one night because it was the first night that I got it to work. It took a little while to download, but it's this thing, and it's called Fuze for Nintendo Switch. Now, what you see here is basically the Fuze home screen when you boot this thing up, but it's a complete game development suite inside of Nintendo Switch. It's something you download for $40 from the Nintendo eShop. You can actually write code. They say the language is sort of a combination of C, Basic, and Python. You can create projects. You can go in and there are thousands of pre-made assets, but the thing also has a sprite editor and a map editor that you can use so that you can build levels in it. It's got wonderful documentation. I'm going to run through a couple of screenshots here. So this is the code editor, and of course you see the on-screen Switch keyboard there, which I have to admit, it works better than you would think though, right? When you use the left analog stick on the Switch, it will move this sort of thing that looks like a spotlight, and it will come over the keys. I'm trying to see if you can see it there. It looks like it's sort of over the slash. Let's see. No, I can't go over that far. It's over the slash there, but they have a neat mechanic with that because it will snap to the key that you need. So as long as you get that little cursor light close enough to one of the keys, it'll just snap onto it. And so it actually makes it pretty easy to type just using the Switch's dual analog setup. But they went over and above that because you can hook a USB keyboard up to your Switch and then turn your Switch into like a little dev machine. And as you can see from the screenshot there, it's legitimate code. You have full access to the sensor array on the Switch Joy-Cons. You have full access to the analog sticks, like all the buttons, everything. There is like a terrain engine in this thing, so you can do 3D graphics. I'm going to run through a couple more screenshots. This is a racing game that there's a demo that comes with this, the full source code. I'll be honest, the physics on that could use a little bit of work, but they're not bad. It has a little bit of a feeling of like drifting and stuff. Here's a baseball stadium that you can load up. This is one of many. There's like thousands of 3D models and sprites, like I said, and a baseball stadium is one of the things that you could load up. You could easily make a baseball game in this thing. Here's a 2D like Castlevania, Metroidvania style game. That's one of the examples, and all these assets are in there. And let's see, back up real quick. So I'm not quite done talking about this thing. This brings me back to the days when I used to use my TI-85 calculator to make games. So I would carry it around with me nonstop. Most of the time when I was in high school and college, I had my calculator out writing games in class instead of paying attention to the teacher. Shame on me. But I loved what I was doing so much that I just carried that thing everywhere. I was always writing a game, and I was just always doing that. And at the time, I think I dreamed of having a little game console that I could carry around and do that. Calculator games it's okay to hand somebody a calculator, like, hey, will you play my game? It's totally different though than making a console game. Like with this system, you can actually make a 4-player like Switch party game and put it up on the TV. And I mean, you don't need a PC, you don't need some inexpensive software development license. You don't need permission from Nintendo. So I actually started making I think I'm going to try to make a 2-dimensional like Swapfire prototype on this thing and see where it goes. I think it's utterly fantastic, and I'm going to be spending more time with this thing. If you have a Switch, you have to get this immediately. And if not, this might be something that puts you over the edge. If you're somebody who's interested in developing and you want to have like a little console that you can carry around and just like rapid prototype real stuff. I mean, the effects on these games are really impressive. There's one shooter game, and it's got a title screen that does like really cool like sine wave effects on and it's all of that is done in code, right? It's not like they just exported the asset like that. I mean, you've got full ability to write to various buffers and so on and so forth. So really powerful stuff, and I think very exciting. So let's see. Run through those shots again, and all right, now it is time for a segment I call Let's Get Techie With It, because PixelFest was founded for many reasons, but one of the reasons, and if you've seen any of the news segments that I was in, sort of leading up to the original couple of PixelFest, I spoke to how once I got engaged with the startup community, and so I was an indie game developer, I got into startups, I started reading VentureBeat. I eventually did a startup competition. I won at that competition and ended up creating what became Stream SDK through that process. I also was a founding member of the Because team. So that's the Bitcoin startup that's out in Virginia Beach. So that's something else that I got to do that I can speak more to later. But through these experiences, what I realized was that I was meeting kind of like 2 types of people in the region. I was meeting some really hardcore engineers. They were very smart. They were very, very technical. But the reason they would tend to come to me is because they knew that I knew the technology, but that I could also make it easy to understand and make it comprehensible. And so I ended up having a lot of conversations with those folks, trying to help them to boil their thing down and make it simple, right? And then I would talk to other folks that had wonderful ideas, but they just had no technical acumen whatsoever, so they couldn't build their way out of a paper box. And I always felt that as a game developer, I had to have both of those skills. I had to be able to build some incredibly complex code on the back end, and then I had to make it so that at the front end, it was something that somebody would pick up and play. A child would be able to pick this up and play it within 3 seconds and get a smile on their face and be happy, right? And I think with any business, right, at the end of the day, that's kind of what you're doing, right? You're creating, some complex thing, and anything from a restaurant to a band to, a t-shirt company to video games to apps. I think that's there. I just also happen to notice that a lot of the startup founders that we celebrate got started with video games. So I've mentioned this before, but your Steve Jobs and your Elon Musk and I mean, your Reid Hoffmans, there's and there's so many more. I can't list them all right now. I mean, Nolan Bushnell, he's another one, right? So these folks would sort of break their technical chops, and they would do it doing games. And so what it meant was they were doing something technical, and then they had to make it simple and like digestible for people. And so just a really big part of all that, though, is at some point we have to dive down into the tech, right? We can talk about the news, we can talk about the meetups, we can talk about the things that are fun that we're playing right now, all that stuff. But what about actually getting technical with it? So I'm gonna pull up. Let's see. How am I going to do this? It's the first time that I'm doing the Let's Get Techie with it. This could be a little rough. We'll see how it goes. But basically what I did, and you know what, I'm just going to be honest. I did this once. I live coded the thing, and I didn't like the way that it turned out. It was very boring. And so instead of just like live coding on the video, what I'm going to do is show you the project in, let's see if it's going to work, in Unity. So what I did was I basically created a simple Minecraft mechanic. And so I'm gonna go ahead and play Unity because I've already set up the project and kind of show you what this thing is doing. Cool. All right. So what we see here is a plane in front of us. It looks like a plane, right? It is actually 10,000 cubes. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see a thing where it says cube, 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 cube. So this is like a whole array of cubes, and if I right-click, then the center point, it's using the center point of the screen. I need like a little cursor there, but we'll dig up a cube. And then if I left-click, right, it's gonna put a cube down, right? So and it builds just like Minecraft. You can see the cubes actually connect to one another, and this was a pretty quick demo to set up. I'd never actually set this up before. I've always been interested in the Minecraft mechanic. And sometimes at boot camps I've said, hey guys, why don't we do Minecraft? And it's funny, as popular as Minecraft is, I've had many students say, well, no, I don't want to make Minecraft, I want to make something different. Now, I'm all about making something different, but sometimes it's good to take a mechanic that you understand and then break it down and study it a little bit. I actually used to write some articles for Gama Sutra called the Games Demystified series. I did Super Mario Galaxy, I did Portal, a few other really popular games at the time that I was writing those articles, and let's see how. And I think they were educational for people, and they were very popular. So it was, I think, a good strategy to take something people are already familiar with when they're just getting rolling, and then sort of show them how that was made. So what I'm going to do here is dive into Dreamweaver and just explain this code, right? So I sort of like live typed this code, live coded this. And it just was a little boring, so I wanted to do it again. So what we have here is I'll just highlight. So in the Unity bootcamp that I do, I cover this. We've got these using statements at the top of any code that we write in Unity. And I think basically these guys have to do with coroutines. A coroutine is where you're doing like an asynchronous call. So say I was calling to a server and I wanted that server to return information to me. There would basically be like a waiting period on that, right? So I would have to use a coroutine, say, hey, program, and wait for a little bit before actually, in fact, not even just for a little bit, like wait for this data to come back to the server before you run this other code in this method or something. And then, of course, we've got the Unity engine. So the Unity engine is like all the power that Unity has. Unity is sort of, the way that I describe it to people is it's kind of like .NET, with a game engine on top of it. Another way that I describe it is it's Photoshop for modeling and simulation. The company's really, I think, headed in that direction now. The new CEO, John Riccitiello, wants to take Unity from, I think when he got involved, it was like a $2 billion company, and he wants to take it up to being a $6 billion company. I've been using Unity for close to 15 years, like 13 years, something to that effect, 14 years. I knew the original three fellows. David Helgeson will still answer my emails from time to time. So it's been a ride to watch them go from being three dudes in a basement to being, this multi-billion-dollar company. Anyway, what we have here, below the Unity engine, all the power that gives us, we have a class that I created called Minecraft. So public class Minecraft, and then you see this colon with mono behavior. And what that means is that Minecraft is going to get everything that mono behavior has, and then extend on top of that. This basically means that it extends or inherits from, and that's inheritance-based object orientation. If we actually look at Unity, what we'll notice, you see on sort of on the right side, let's see here, on the right side of the screen, you'll see inspector, and then what you'll see is main camera, and you'll see these components like transform, camera, you'll see the audio listener, and then the Minecraft script that I created. So each of those things are called components. Back in the day, there was just like inheritance-based object orientation. Pull Dreamweaver back up, and it would create some interesting, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just interesting circumstances. For example, back in the Garage Games days when I was working with those guys, one of the stories they told about why they were adding a component system to their engine was that somebody had created a really cool asset. They basically had their own asset store back in the day, and it was a butterfly, right? And so they had this beautiful animated butterfly, probably created in 3D Studio Max or Maya, and they released it into the game world. It had some scripts that would make it animate and fly and whatnot, and it happened upon a crossbow in the game. And all of a sudden the butterfly picked up the crossbow, started flying around with it, and of course that's not something that was desirable. The issue was that when they made, say, when you see Minecraft, get back to Dreamweaver, when you see Minecraft here, that's like the butterfly. And then here, they had some base class that Butterfly was deriving from, and in that base class was the ability to pick up a crossbow. So the base class was really like not, let me think about this. The base class was probably too abstract and had too much functionality, and so, that's the reason for, essentially having composition-based object orientation. Let's bring Unity back up here. So in a component system, you'll have something like a game object, like we've got main camera here, we've got directional light here, and then what we do is we just drag and drop components that we want on that. Now we can access the code for each of those components. For example, the Minecraft component, I can go in and I can write the code, but it's only the code for that thing. And so what I can do is I can create more complex objects out of any combination of these other objects instead of having basically like a linear chain of inheritance only. And so, it's a more powerful system. I always thought that was an interesting story, and sort of explains why you want composition-based object orientation. Now, we've got a couple of variables under the class name. So the first two, we see public, and what that means is that those variables are accessible from other scripts. So if I wrote another script besides Minecraft, that script could reach in and change those variables and have access to them. But it also means that those variables are accessible in the Unity editor. So when we come over to Unity, what we see over here, speed and rotation speed, and we see those fields are actually accessible in the Unity editor. So when I say it's public, I can edit those while I'm running the game, or just like maybe I'm tweaking my gameplay and I want to see how things feel. The next two variables, of course, are private int inventory and private int total cubes. So the first two, speed and rotation speed, those have to do with my camera movement. I want the speed of my camera. This is the speed that the camera, using the WASD or arrow keys, will move forward, backward, right, and left. And when I say right and left, it's strafing, right, moving completely side to side. Rotation speed, of course, that's the speed that the camera will rotate about its x-axis for pitch and rotate about its y-axis for yaw. Then once we come down to the private variables, inventory and total cubes, these have to do with the fact that, of course, in Minecraft, in the regular mode anyway, maybe not in the creative mode, you have an inventory, and you can only carry so much stuff, and you have to dig it up from the world before you can carry it and add it to your inventory. So with this demo, I lay out the world, and I want you to actually use the world as your inventory and not use more than what I gave you. And of course, total cubes is going to be the total cubes that are in the world, and that's how I'm going to keep track of that. The inventory is going to be what you actually have at your disposal for laying down. So we have a thing here called void start. And so in any Unity script, right when you boot it up, there'll be a void start, and it says, hey, start is called before, that's really small, the first frame update. And then of course there's the update callback down here. So every Unity script, as soon as you create a new script, will include these two callbacks. And basically the code that's in start will be called once at the beginning of program execution, and this code that's in update will be called every frame as fast as the computer can call it. And I added a late update callback here. This will be added at the end of everything else that happens, and so a lot of times you'll get smoother graphics and stuff if you put it there, right, so that it's the last thing that updates, especially with camera movement like I'm doing in this script. So in the start callback, of course, I've got a double loop. I I called the variables I and J, although it probably would make more sense to call them X and Z, because what I'm doing inside this double loop is laying out a bunch of cubes. And I'm doing that along the X and Z axes of the world. So inside this double loop, we are creating a primitive using the primitive type cube. So Unity has some built-in primitives that you can use. So I don't have to import some 3D model from elsewhere. I'm just generating this dynamically. And then we see cube, which when we create the cube right here with GameObject.create primitive, it actually returns a game object. This is the type that it is, and the name of the variable of that type. The name of the variable we created is cube. So now all of a sudden we can reference that and say, hey, the cube that we just generated, we're going to get its transform component, which if you come into Unity, let's hide this guy. Of course, we come into Unity, what we're talking about is this thing right here, that's the transform component, but it will be of the cube, right? We don't have any cubes in here right now because they won't get generated until we run it. If I hit the run button, you'll see all these cubes get generated. It's like 10,000 cubes. But yeah, so we'll be talking about one of these transform components, one of these cube transform components. And yeah, so basically what we do right there is create 10,000 cubes, and we position them at I. I did it at -5 and J. The reason I did it at -5 was just because my camera, I didn't want it to be like right at my camera's position. I wanted them to be below wherever my camera was, and so that's why this is the y-axis. So I use a -5 there, and then I and J means it's just going to lay them out in that grid pattern, right? So it's going to go along one axis, and when it gets to the end, it's going to start over again. It's going to move one up, and then and build them in a grid. Okay, inside the update callback, this is where we are going to take control of. Well, let's see. This is where we're going to, listen for mouse clicks, right? So the first conditional inside the update callback, and a conditional is like whenever we want to ask the computer a question. So I'm saying, hey, if this stuff happened, then do this other stuff, right? So here we've got input.get mouse down 1. That's actually the right mouse button. So in computer science, when you have an array or you're talking about memory, the very first element is always indexed as 0, right? 0 is a number. And then you go 0, 1, 2, 3, funny story, when Apple was started, Steve Wozniak was employee number 1, and he and his dad, when they set the company up, they made Steve Jobs employee number 2. Obviously, Steve Jobs, he had quite an ego and everything like that. Apparently, he cried when he was made employee number 2, and so what they did was said, no, you know what, you're going to be employee 0, like the first index of an array. And I guess he felt better about that, so he became sort of like higher up in the array, I guess, than Steve Wozniak. I thought that was a funny story. Anyway, so the right mouse button is at index 1, and the left mouse button down here is at index 0. So input.get mouse button down 1, and inventory is less than total cubes. So theoretically, you could go around and hit the right mouse button and pick up or dig up all the cubes in the scene, and then you would have 10,000. And as long as your inventory is like 9,999, then you'd be allowed to do this, right? Because this is 10,000, this is 9,999. You could pick up that last cube. And what happens is this: we create a variable called raycast hit. I'm sorry, it's actually the variable's called hit. It's of type raycast hit, and physics.raycast is a call that we want to make when we want to more or less pick a point and have imagine a line coming out of that point, and then whatever that line intersects will get cached and will get sent out of this raycast hit. So we're going to start at the position of our main camera. We are going to go in the direction of the forward vector of that camera, which is essentially the z-axis coming out of the front of that camera locally. And then we have this code here that says out hit. And so the variable that we're going to store this into is hit, and out, basically what this means is that it's going to store the value coming from this into the variable hit. And we're only going to do this raycast, 100 meters out in front of the camera. So Unity is an engine, works in meters, and so, that's as far as it will extend. So it'll only go for 100 cubes. If you're at one end of the grid of 10,000 cubes, if you're too far back, you won't actually be able to reach the other side, because those cubes should all be a meter in width, and so if you were too far, you wouldn't be able to reach the last one. But 100 should be enough to reach basically the whole field. if hit.transform not equal null. So basically, if you click this button and there's nothing in front of you, then what will happen is hit will not have anything stored into it, and it will return null for the transform of the hit variable. So, but if hit.transform is not equal to null, that means there was a cube in front of us because there's actually a value stored in there. And so what we want to do is we want to destroy the cube, like we're digging it up, right? So the cube disappears, but it doesn't completely disappear because what we do is we keep track of it in our inventory. So our inventory goes up by 1 every time we dig up a cube. And here on the left mouse button, we have basically like the inverse of that, right? So we're going to say, hey, if you hit the left mouse button, and if your inventory is greater than 0, we don't want to be able to put down more cubes than what we picked up. So if we started going into the negatives, of course, that wouldn't work, right? So we've got the same thing with raycast hit. We still do physics.raycast. That's all the same. Hit.transform not equal null. That's the same. We're asking that same question, like, did we actually hit something? But then what we do is we're just going to take this code, which is, it's very similar to the code that we had in the start callback, right? In fact, this line and this line, those are the same. But once we get on down to the next line, cube.transform.position equal hit.transform.position plus hit.normal. So what this is doing is saying, hey, when you did that raycast, you hit a cube that was out in the scene. Now what we want to do is we want to figure out what surface normal you hit. So if I have anything approximating the cube here. So I'm just going to take this book. So pretend that this is a cube, even though it's not. So basically what's going on there is the very center. Imagine the very center of this book. And you probably can't even see that book. Let's just imagine that you've got a cube. And if you hit the top of the cube, of course, the surface normal is going to be 0, 1, 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the center point, which is in the middle of that cube, and then we're going to add a 1 to it on the y-axis, right? So it'll automatically position on top. And of course, if we hit like the left side of the cube, say the surface normal is going to be 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, right? Because it's pointing along, say, the x-axis, and then it's not pointing any way along the y-axis or the z-axis, it's just out to the left of it. So this basically just accomplishes the cubes being able to stack on top of each other instantaneously, right? So we take the position of the cube that we hit, and then what we do is we add that surface normal, because the physics.raycast, it will keep track of the surface that the raycast actually intersected, right? So there's a plane and there's a ray, and you might have done this in one of your math classes. So this is a good use for that. And then of course, inventory we have inventory minus minus, and that means that we're going to decrement inventory, take one away from it. Okay, so now into late update, and this is where things go more where you've got removing the camera in here, and so anytime you're getting into camera rotation and motion and so on and so forth, sometimes it's advisable to use late update, so just like everything else changes first, and then finally you change the perspective with which you're looking upon the world. So in the first line here, we have camera.main.transform.local Euler angles equal, and this is like a whole mouthful, right? So I'm not even going to say everything here, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the current Euler angle value about the x-axis, right? Which, if you say my head is the camera, right? The x-axis is the line like going through my head like this way, and so if I change that, I get look up and down, okay? Now what I'm changing it by though is mouse Y. So the y-axis of the mouse. So my mouse is actually on the desk. If it's going up and down, it's changing the y value. But see, I want that to equate to how my head is moving. We're taking that current whatever the current rotation is about the x-axis, and then we're going to add whatever we're getting from the y-axis of the mouse motion. Multiply it by rotation speed, which is the variable from up here, and then also by time.delta time. So this is a very important part about the way computers work. If we didn't have time.delta time in here, this would probably be happening way too fast. So, and also it would run at a different speed on different computers. So delta time is the amount of time that's passed from the last frame to this frame. On a slow computer, that would be a big amount of time, relatively. As the computers get faster and faster and faster, that's a smaller and smaller amount of time, right? Now, of course, the computer will make up for it because it's looping more times, right? So it's basically integrating that time quicker. So, on this computer, I can imagine that delta time is going to be a fairly small value. It's just going to be running that at more frames per second, basically. But the cool thing is that if I'm running this on my computer, or whether I'm running it on some old Android, that in real time, those cameras will actually rotate the same number of degrees regardless, which is cool. We do basically something very similar for the y-axis. That's where we want to, we've got, and what we're going to use is, we're going to use the x-axis of the mouse. So if we take our mouse and we're moving it right and left, we actually want to turn our camera, right? But we're going to rotate the camera about its y-axis. So that's why we have a comma here. This is separating the x. This value is the x-axis, and then we've got a comma right there, and then we've got the value that we're going to plug in for the y-axis. And very similar, as I explained. It's just kind of interesting how you have to take the x-axis from the mouse controls the y-axis of the camera, and sort of vice versa for the pitch. Once we come over to the last component, what we do is we just plug in the, whatever the local Euler angles, and we could have used Euler angles here. The reason I use local is if we end up attaching the camera to some other object, say we wanted to attach it to a character, we would end up using probably the local Euler angles of the camera. But we just plug the z value back in there. We don't really want to modify it at all. If we set it to 0, that would actually be a modification of it. Whatever the engine is assigning to that, because the engine actually works with quaternions, not with Euler angles, but it has a conversion. And so we want to let the engine actually set that to whatever it's going to be based on the changes we're making to the other two axes. Then, finally, on the last line of code here, we are going to translate our camera. And, we basically want to be able to move forward, backward, and we want to strafe left and right. So, on the x-axis, what we're going to do is we're going to take the horizontal axis. This is something that's defined in the input manager of Unity, and we're going to multiply that by speed, which is this first variable that we have up here, and then by time.delta time. And so this is, we're going to move left and right this way, and so the horizontal axis is defined as the A or D key. If you hit A, you're going to get a -1. If you hit D, you're going to get a +1. Ditto for the left and right arrow keys. Then over here, we're going to manipulate the z-axis, but what we're going to do is use the vertical axis. So this is where we'll get a 1 from a W or a -1 from an S. We'll also get a 1 from the up key and a -1 from the down key. So, and I don't think I was ready for that yet. Let's get rid of Dreamweaver. Let's get rid of Unity. All right, so that was PixelCast number 3. I was nervous about this one because I was adding to the formatting and sort of the complexity of the show here. Hopefully this went well. Like I said, with Let's Get Techie, I had to do that. I had to do that twice. I'll be honest, I ended up doing the show twice because I just wasn't happy with the way it turned out the first time. And you know what? Let that be a bonus developer lesson. Iteration is a hugely important part of game development. You're always going to make something, and you might think that it went okay, or maybe you thought it went terribly. Either way, whenever you do it again, it's going to come out a little bit better. So, with that, I'm going to head out for the night. Again, I'm Jeremy Lessie, founder of PixelFest. Let's all keep growing through love of games.